You're now listening to the Adiel Gorel Show. Each episode, I'll bring you the latest news from my discussions with top health and wellness experts so that you can bring yourself into better health. Today, on the Adiel Gorel Show.
There were 14 people every hour using the equipment and 4 teachers working the floor. I'm at the point now where I can see people's postural problems from across the street through their clothing.
Okay, so for the listener or the viewer right now, they say, well, it makes sense to me, or at least I hope they do. And now they say, well, I'm drawing a blank. I'm drawing a blank. Because when I was investing as an investor in money, people told me you should have your own team and the team should be a lawyer, a CPA, maybe a financial advisor. Oh, okay, I can get my head. But what is he talking about? What am I going to do? I'm driving my car right now, listening to this podcast. I'm in Silicon Valley. Help! Where do I start?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's one of the main things I deal with people about. Like a lot of, I just think it's a modern way to do business. Like you meet and connect with each other first. You have a conversation. You see if you want to take the next step. Then in the first step, we do like a full scale 90-minute assessment before we even talk about making an informed choice of working together or not. There's 2 reasons for that. I only work with people that I can absolutely guarantee I can help. And I need that 90 minutes to get a full spectrum of that health history, right? Because we talked earlier, like ankle, knee, low back, you don't find that stuff out. And ironically, I've worked with clients like 6 months in and they're still listing injuries they'd forgotten about, right? So having that is a really key part. But while I'm doing that, one of my main goals is to map out the resources that people already have. And that's a big part of that conversation, right? So when somebody is, let's say you're starting out as an investor and they start talking to you, well, do you know any lawyers? Oh, actually, my cousin's a lawyer. Oh, is that the kind of law that fits with the business that you're trying to start? And so all that stuff can come up in an interaction and a conversation because most of us aren't holding that information in our frontal lobe and we don't recognize the pool of resources that's around us already. And then there's the next level of it, which is professionalism. What I mean by that is before I opened my own actual brick and mortar clinic, which I ran for 6 years, I was in a pharmacy in Vancouver, in the downtown, and they had a treatment room there, which is why I was there. But the other reason I was there was selfish. It was run by a PhD pharmacology. And so when I didn't have clients, I would go out and talk to the doctor and ask him questions about supplements and all that kind of stuff. And it made me healthier to understand these things. I made my own choices and resourced him first. Secondarily, I don't diagnose or prescribe, right? Underneath my designation, insurance, and that kind of stuff. And so he's one of the people, right? This business of his has been around for 40 years. They already ship supplements all over the planet. And so whether it's my guy or the guy down the street that you trust because he's your guy, that's the right person to tell you what supplements to take while we're trying to rebuild a joint in your body. Okay. And I can't legally tell you what to anyway.
Okay, let me step back. Where are you located physically? You?
Yeah, so physically I'm located on Zoom. And what I mean by that is after having my brick and mortar clinic in Vancouver, Canada for 6 years, for a number of reasons, including the fact that there was a 3-month waiting list for almost the entire time, I moved online. So 8 years ago, I started teaching strictly online. Part of the other reason behind it is I wanted to do an experiment. I thought I could help more people by taking the one-on-one as the thumb and offering group programs as these fingers and making what I call like a Bruce Lee fist, just a really strong system. And so I was just kind of really sure that it's like 80% or more of what I do works to this platform. And it does. I've continued to be a partner in canceling orthopedic surgeries and things like that for the last year or 8 years now.
So let me be a devil's advocate. And
Please.
I'll go back to that example that somebody sprained their ankle, it radiates right into their foot. Wouldn't you benefit from being able to lay your fingers on that foot?
In the short version, or like the emergency care part of our accident hospital rehab analogy, absolutely. In the long term, it doesn't make that big of a difference because my role as the rehabilitation guide and the authority in that space with my clients, I'm only an advocate. What I mean by that is we have 9 nervous systems. And the nervous system that we are talking about earlier, without naming it, is called the proprioceptive nervous system, right? It tells me my foot is straight. Then I twist my ankle. I walk with my foot a little crooked. It becomes the normal. And I've told my proprioceptive nervous system that this is straight now. So my job with everybody that I take on as a client is I kind of work like a marriage counselor between them and their proprioceptive nervous system, them and their movement patterns. And we just keep on making communication better and better and better and better until they don't need to come to see me anymore. Their relationship is fine.
So let's say that I'm one of your clients right now. Right now, I'm seeing your torso and your head. You see my torso and my head. So let's say I'm that person with, the foot injury.
Yeah.
Would you need for me to stand up, to move, to what? What would you need to see?
So when we move from the 30 minutes to the 90 minutes, absolutely. There's a full body, like postural assessment, movement assessment. We put the camera on landscape mode and they lie down and I watch them move. But as much as that might seem weird, like I won't go into all the training I did with movement. Suffice to say that the studio I was in for 8 years, there were 14 people every hour using the equipment and 4 teachers working the floor. I'm at the point now where I can see people's postural problems from across the street through their clothing. And that's just day to day.
It reminds me of a story about Moshe Feldenkrais. So I'm a teacher of the Feldenkrais method, and my teacher, Anat Baniel, who was on this show, told me a story about Feldenkrais. Now, he developed such an eye, as you say, for posture. He was once in the London Ballet, and from his seat as a spectator, could see that the prima ballerina had an issue with her. And then also, he could, with no fail, spot whether you or me or anyone else is a firstborn or not.
Yeah.
And I guess the logic is when you're firstborn, your parents carry you more, they hold you more. And he could see the effects on your spine later on in life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All of that seems completely rational and feasible to me. I totally agree with it. And the injury stuff, if you are willing to look, it's quite apparent. Right? You don't have to be a specialist like either of us. You just pay attention for a while and it starts to stick out.
Okay, so now I feel like the person listening to this podcast is starting to feel a little more hopeful because they say, look, I'm a busy Silicon Valley person. I barely have time to go to the bathroom. I don't have time to seek out acupuncture people and, Pilates people, but maybe I can contact Jacob. So, Jacob, again, I'm not doing it to be an advertising arm for you. I'm doing it because of trying to be as useful to as many people via this podcast as I can. So let's say I just turned, my ankle, which, by the way, as it happens, I did.
Right.
So how would I get in touch with you to start the process rolling?
Yeah. So there's 2 main pathways. Consulting.100yearplan.com is the first. And then to get more information first, which I'm fully in support of, is ebook.100yearplan.com. And I outline a lot of the principles we've spoken about today. And then something else that we should mention is like being that busy person. This is the issue that came up because, I took my training and my apprenticeship in a traditional Pilates studio as well. The osteopathic work takes time. And when I was in clinical rehabilitation and lawyers and insurance companies were sending me clients, doctors are coming in to be my clients, I noticed the same thing. Like I talked to this one client and she was in the car 12 hours a week driving between appointments. And this is somebody who was hit so hard from behind that their seat in their car broke. Right. And so that's in my mind. Like, how stressful and traumatizing is it for you to be in your car constantly and like go get a massage, drive through traffic? So one step forward, maybe two steps back in terms of stress. So to work with me, there is a mandatory minimum commitment that you will do your prescribed movement routine 15 to 20 minutes a day. If you can't do that, you can't bridge that gap between yourself and your movement patterns, your proprioceptive nervous system. And that's the thing that gives you the space where you don't have to come into the studio 3 days a week for an hour and a half and put in the time that I did. In my 20s, I clocked it. And between the modalities and working on myself and everything else, I mean, you know how long you've worked to become a Feldenkrais practitioner. Like I got my 10,000 hours without a doubt. But who has time for that? A 1%er who's not given any other choice in their lives. And if you're busy and you have a family and a business and you're up to other stuff, we don't have that time anymore. So we just need to carve out that 20 minutes a day of self-care, get the movement patterns, and then ideally be set free to do movement you actually love doing.
Okay, I'm still going to drill it down. I'm a simple guy. I want a simple solution. I'm driving in my car right now. I'm listening to this podcast. I want to get in touch with you. You sound like an attractive resource for me. What do I do?
Consulting.100yearplan.com.
Consulting.100, the whole word, 100 year, not years, just year, 100yearplan.com.
And then from there, we have a 30-minute conversation. It's a deposit call, so nobody's time is wasted. That's the 90-minute call. If that is not an absolute yes, no questions asked, deposit refunded. I do not want anybody lowering my success rate. And I guard it very jealously because it's almost at 100%.
I understand. So now you call it 100-year. Can you talk about why you call it that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the research phase, which I just kind of created a Venn diagram of, there was the rehab phase and the research phase. And there was even a period of time where I maybe got a little bit addicted to the learning side of it. And people who cared enough about me were like, you need to get out and start practicing and stop just studying all the time. But during that research phase, I was fortunate enough to spend time with a lot of really, really highly trained people, much more educated than I am. And interestingly enough, Dr. Aubrey de Grey, who's a double PhD geneticist, Stephen Chernesky, a biomolecular chemist and multi-author, completely different times, completely different conversations. I'm super fortunate. They were face-to-face conversations. They both said DNA is designed to live to around 120. And so what we look at is not whether or not you can change that fact, but all the things that we might do to shorten it. And that's where it really opened up my mind, where I started understanding the difference as well between lifespan and health span. And so the 100-year plan is actually all about health span. It's about how long is your quality of life. Because if you look around in our culture and society, there's a lot of being old that's related to like a poorly lit room, daytime television. And I don't think that's a life worth living.
Yeah, I mean, in general, especially based on the many podcast interviews that we have, I think that people, and unfortunately sometimes, MDs are too quick to say, oh, you're 70, of course you would. No, I'm sorry. I think a person could be 70 or 80, and it's not a God-given fate that they will have this pain or that limitation. I think this society as a whole still, they used to, I believe, worship youth even more. Even in the rock and roll times, when I was young, they said, don't trust anyone over 30, But
Right.
now, I believe society worships youth less because the baby boomers are older and they're so dominant and they want. But still, I feel that there is a notion that, come on, man, you're 59. Of course, nope. You could be 59 and very healthy. You could be 79. So, I mean, a lot of that stuff is in our perception that somehow age must make you more, more debilitated. That is wrong, isn't it?
I agree entirely. For the way that I language it is that they're hypnotized into believing age equals decay. And my proof was all this time I spent in my 20s at like 10,000 hours. The Pilates teachers, 80s, late 80s. One in particular was very early 90s. Her posture, would do these like 3-day, 8-hour-a-day workshops with her, and the rest of us, all these young Pilates teachers, would start to slouch. Her spine was perfect. Like, I've never seen somebody like that, and no tension at all. And the same thing with Aikido. I studied Aikido for almost 20 years, and you go to Japan and there's these 85-year-old people that, pick you up, throw you about 15 feet across the floor. They look like weak or frail or whatever you want to think because your perception is old. Try grabbing their arm or taking their wallet. Like, I dare you.
So, it's the same. This year, we had an interviewee, a Qigong master. And in fact, I picked up Qigong this year, and it's now my daily practice. And I've seen the father, now he's the late father, because he would have been, more than 100. But I've seen him at, 85, do stuff that it's just, so I mean, it's the same thing. So age is not really the only determinant. There are many others. Now, you say, I think, at some point that part of the pain that we experience is an addiction. Part of it is also psychosomatic. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And let's cap the age thing first with one little piece. I love talking about this. We make 300 to 500 billion new cells every day. Now, obviously, like a newborn infant is at the 500 billion and a senior citizen is at the 300 billion. But if you drop below that number, you're already on your way to the hospital because homeostasis is failing. But if that's true, which it is, and that most of our cells are replaced every 18 to 24 months, which is also true, and they haven't been able to find a human cell older than 7 years, then it must be habit that you can have a 15-year-old injury. Because there's no tissue that remains that's injured that's at like a, and so that's where the habit pattern, psychosomatic, or the neurological and psychological parts of it affect the physiology. I have scars from the surgeries that I received, but I actually have no scar tissue on my body. And that's thanks to the pharmacologist and manual work and energetic work. But I was able to get rid of that scar tissue because I stopped creating the habit of replacing those cells with similar cells. And the same thing's entirely possible. I mean, we do it to plants all the time. You go out and you see trees they've got a rope on them to pull them this way so that they grow in a certain direction. But we don't think about our bodies that way. And so you can grow a straight leg from a crooked leg. Like the studio I apprenticed at in Vancouver for Pilates, Ballet BC trained there. And you could take somebody who had bowed tibia from all the jumping, and over 8 to 10 months of diligent work, straighten those leg bones as they replace themselves every day. So the physiological side is available, but it can be metered by incredibly strong habits on the neurological level, the reflexive stuff. And then, of course, as you know, having interviewed people, there's a massive limitation out there in mentality too. And our society really supports it, right? Like, oh, you're stuck like this, or it hurts, cut it out. And the idea that you can repair or recover isn't really there.
Just using the logic, I come from a tech background, so just using logic, I will strengthen what you say. So let's say that no cell in your body is going to live longer than 7 years. So in theory, you should not have anything that's more than 7 years old, although we know we do. And probably it's you wake up in the morning one day after that injury and you tell yourself in your mind, I'm injured. Now it's going to be 7 years and 1 day. Then
Yeah.
you wake up the second day, now guys, 7 years and 2 days, etc., etc. There are books written about how our thoughts shape our DNA, So, I mean, like that, isn't it?
I agree entirely. And to reflect it back and back you up on a point you made earlier, I believe it's the same thing with waking up one day and then saying every day again, I am old. Right? Same result.
Actually, you just reminded me of something fascinating. I was about 33 years old, and I had another friend who was about 32. I swear to you, at 33, I felt absolutely zero difference than 25 or 20. I had a young guy running around. One day, my 32-year-old friend asked me in a conversation, don't you start feeling the age like you are more limited? And I remember my shock, because I'm not a professional, NBA player where you might see no, I'm just a young guy running around. But already at 32, he was thinking like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the power of habit. And there's another piece that, in my opinion, is compounded with that. And so just to touch on it for a moment, I believe that we're born alive, right? Like all of our nervous systems are firing. There's a whole bunch of stuff in neuroplasticity that we don't need to get into, but basically you're like a blank slate in terms of neurology. There's all these pathways that are waiting to be developed, and some, if you don't use them, they don't actually develop. Others you do, and they do develop. And infants go through developmental processes. Developmental movement patterning is one of the modalities I studied for about 14 years, and it really taught me these pieces. And then we do something very interesting, which is, after kind of moving freely for this period of time, we're taken and we're put in a chair and we're told to sit still. And our nervous system is really intelligent. And so, like, if you're sitting with perfect posture, your body weight is balanced on your sits bones. And between your sits bones and the chair is some tissue. And so your brain says, if I stay here for too long, lymph is going to stop flowing, blood is going to stop flowing, there's no airflow, I'm going to get gangrene and rot to death. And so we move off the sits bones, right? And so as a child, like, we're actually meant to fidget. And I think the kids who won't sit still in class are the ones with the good nervous systems. And then we kind of hammer that out of us for at least 12 years. And if you're good at it, you get rewarded with another 8 years of sitting. And that's where you end up this crazy statistic. Over 60% of the population over 30 says they have low back pain. And so I believe it comes from that. It comes from, like, staving off all these signals that we're supposed to be getting back, telling us that it's time to get up and move.
Using this one example, would it benefit people to replace their chair with a physio ball, a pretty big physio ball, which by definition kind of makes you move around?
Yeah, the best answer I've been taught for that is a bit more of a global one, and it is a change is as good as a rest. So we can't all like move a treadmill into our office or quit the 8-hour workday, but you can sit, stand, walk around, park your car as far away from the front door of the office as possible, and all these little things that can be sprinkled throughout the day to give as much variety as possible and shorten the extended periods of one position. Another way of saying it is if you ever go and visit medieval castles, one of the things they did to criminals or bad people is they had these little rooms built into the wall, and they were too short to stand in and too small to lie down in. And so they put you in an uncomfortable position and kept you there as punishment.
Okay, so I mean, you talked about before about the opening of the joints, the aligning of the structure, and the strengthening of the system. But looking at your ebook, you start by talking about the most basic thing, breathing.
Yeah. Yeah. So the elements of life are obvious, right? Like I've heard 3 different versions of it. It doesn't matter which one, but I use the 333 or the 222. And so you can live 3 weeks without eating, especially if you're from North America. You can live 3 days without water, and you can only live 3 minutes without breathing. And so breath is so important to life in that respect. But once we put it up on that pedestal as so much more important than the latest diet or, this beverage, which is super hydrating, whatever that is, when you look at the physiology of it, it starts to become obvious because we evolved as a pump, right? We are meant to lie down, to walk, to run, and to squat. And everything between our pelvic floor and the base of our skull is part of that pump. And inside there, we have 21 muscles that are all involved with breathing. And only the diaphragm is considered not a postural muscle. The other 20 breath muscles are posture muscles. So breathing is peristalsis, heartbeat, function of all the organs, compression, decompression. And when you take that and then our previous conversation about the core, especially the core musculature, that's the only thing that you have holding your body between your low ribs and your pelvis. Your spine isn't meant to bear weight, muscles are. Discs aren't meant to bear weight, muscles and actually fascia are. And so breathing actually has those things working, right? Constantly. We could be exercising all day, every day, like we're supposed to if we are engaged in our breathing, but most people aren't breathing. They're actually just not dying. They're just breathing enough to survive.
And then you talk about water.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what percentage? Because there's it depends which book you read or TED Talk. There's so many different numbers. Whatever percentage of water you think we are, it's a high percentage, right? It's definitely a higher percentage than food or other elements. And so that's the point. Being properly hydrated is a key component to overall health. And water is hydrating. Most other things are not. And we drink a lot of things throughout the day that only actually tell us that we should be drinking even more water to balance it. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I love coffee. Caffeine is one of my favorite drugs. I have one every morning, but it's accompanied by a double-sized glass of water, so I can at least try and break even.
Well, in fact, when I was in the military, they told us to drink at regular intervals, whether we were thirsty or not, because they claimed, the commanders that is, that our thirst mechanism is one of the faulty mechanisms in the human body. Is that true?
Yes. And, back to some of the psychosomatic stuff you're talking about earlier, I've even experienced this in my own body too. Not only is that mechanism off, but what I read in my research is it triggers a message that says in. And a lot of us are misinformed. And so we hear the in bell go off and we go to food. And our body's trying to tell us to drink water, and we're standing there in front of the fridge and snacking out of boredom, who knows what, and dehydrating further.
Well, Jacob, it occurs to me that I'm having so much fun talking to you that we could go on like this for 2 or 3 hours, but I realize that we've already been going on and longer than our normal podcast time. So I would love to talk to you again. Maybe we'll bring you again. But in the meantime, once again, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, if you can be kind enough to tell us how, once again.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, I'll enunciate it better this time. So it is consulting.100yearplan.com. Those are all alphabet letters. There are no numbers in that. And then if you want just more information, you can go to ebook.100yearplan.com. Either way, if you're ready to make the commitment and have the 90-minute consult and learn what I can do for you personally, or you just want to get acquainted with it first and then follow through.
Very fascinating. Thank you so much. And Jacob, I appreciate that you took the time to be here with us. Looking forward to seeing you in the future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Adiel. I really appreciate your questions and enjoy how you like to dig into this stuff too. So thank you so much for your time.
All right, thanks.
Be well.
Thank you for joining me today for the second part of our amazing interview. If you didn't catch part 1, don't miss out. The link is in the description below for you. And be sure to click the subscribe button for more videos.